A falcon's cry echoed above the ranch, and Jack Whitlow looked up just in time to see a drone slice across the New Mexico sky like it owned it. The bird's shrill call faded into the hot air as Jack shaded his eyes against the late morning sun. For a second, he thought the cry belonged to Blaze, though that couldn't be. Blaze hadn't flown in years. Still, something in the sound lodged in his chest, like a memory reaching for the present. He took a deep breath. The air was bone dry, thick with dust, and laced with the faint scent of sagebrush baking under the heat. Jack had just come back from the Cactus Diner, where the usual crowd of old-timers swapped weather forecasts and complaints about cracked driveways. His coffee was still warm in the travel mug, the newspaper folded under one arm with the crossword half done. Rick Holloway had joined him for breakfast, as he often did, rambling about the new HOA president, Karen something, and her plans to beautify the area. "She's got that look," Rick had said, stirring his coffee without sugar. The kind of smile that comes with clipboards and a hunger for control. At the time, Jack just chuckled and turned the page. But now, with the sky above his pasture buzzing like a wasp nest, Rick's words felt like a warning. The drone zipped again, a black dot weaving above his cattle. The herd spooked, heads jerking up in unison. 2 calves bolted toward the edge of the grazing field, and one of them clipped the wire fencing. Jack flinched as the wood post snapped and the wire drooped into the grass. He slammed the truck door shut and jogged across the field, boots kicking up dry tufts of dust. By the time he reached the break in the fence, the drone had vanished over the ridge. No sound, no sign of a controller. Just open sky and the hum of cicadas. He stood there for a moment, hand on his hip, listening. There wasn't a single soul in sight, just the hills rolling away toward the sun, the wind tossing the weeds, and the dull creak of the broken fence. He bent to fix what he could, driving the sagging post back upright with a spare he kept nearby. But even with the fence patched, something else felt out of place. It wasn't just the damage. It was the sense of being watched. Later that afternoon, Jack settled on his porch with a glass of iced tea and the hum of an old AM radio playing some Johnny Cash tune. Rick's dusty blue pickup pulled into the driveway, the tires crunching over gravel. He stepped out with his usual deliberate pace, wearing a sun-faded hat, and the smirk of someone who knew more than he let on. "You see it too?" Rick asked, easing down into the chair beside Jack. "The drone?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, same one buzzed my place yesterday. Flew low over the shed like it was casing the place." Jack took a slow sip. "You think it's Karen?" Rick let out a short laugh. "I think Karen just got herself elected HOA president and now fancies herself neighborhood security. She'll be over here measuring your grass with a ruler next." Jack didn't smile. He watched the horizon instead. The hills were quiet now, soft with the color of early evening, but the air had a sharpness to it, like something was shifting just beneath the surface. Rick squinted toward the fence line. "You still got that glove? The Falcon one?" Jack glanced at him. "Haven't used it in 10 years. "Might be time." Jack didn't answer. Not yet. But the idea lingered like dust in his lungs. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the ranch, Jack heard it again, that faint mechanical whine, almost like a mosquito with a grudge. He stepped off the porch and moved slowly, eyes scanning the sky. There it was, same black shape, same hovering motion, only now it drifted lower. Not over the pasture this time, but directly above his house. It paused there, unnaturally still, as if it were thinking. Jack said nothing. He didn't move, just stood there in his boots, arms folded across his chest, gaze locked on the machine. "You picked the wrong ranch, lady," he mutters. The envelope had that unmistakable HOA logo, and Jack knew, before opening it, trouble. It sat on the porch railing, catching the light just enough to make its seal look official, almost proud of itself. Jack didn't open it right away. He just stared at it, letting the midday heat rise around him. The cicadas buzzed louder than usual, or maybe his hearing was sharper today. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower droned, stubbornly chewing through summer grass. He took a sip of sweet tea and sat down in the old wicker chair, letting the creak settle beneath him. The envelope was still there, like it was waiting for the right moment to bite. Rick's voice from that morning drifted back to him, sarcastic, matter-of-fact. "Karen's the type who trims your roses and calls it a service." Jack hadn't laughed then, and he wasn't laughing now. Eventually, he tore the envelope open with a calloused thumb. "Dear Resident," it began, impersonal already. The letter was typed neatly in bold segments, each one colder than the last. Jack read the words slowly. Visible yard disorder. Aesthetic disharmony. Ongoing concern regarding disused structures on southern property edge. And finally, recommendation for review as potential shared use community space. He reread that last line, eyebrows drawing in. Shared use, he muttered. They think this is a park? Just then, Rick's truck rumbled up the drive again, kicking gravel into the weeds. He climbed out with a rolled-up HOA newsletter tucked under one arm and a bottle of lemonade in the other. "You're going to want to see this," he said, handing over the paper. Jack unrolled it carefully. The front page had a banner. Shaping Tomorrow's Community. Today. Underneath were color images clearly taken from above. His land, his barn, his workshop. The drone's angle was unmistakable. "They printed this?" Jack asked. "Mailed it to every house in the HOA this morning. That photo in the corner? That's your back pasture." Jack folded the paper. Slowly. "You know they're laying the groundwork," Rick said, settling into the other chair. "If enough folks think your land looks underused, they'll push a vote, try to claim eminent domain or some creative HOA clause." Jack looked at the letter again. "I'm not even part of the HOA." Rick shrugged. "That's never stopped Karen before?" As if summoned, a car rolled up to the gate, bright blue sedan, spotless, with one of those license plate frames that read, H.A. Strong. Out stepped a woman in slacks and pastel flats, clipboard in hand, hair curled just so. Karen Lockridge walked like someone who'd practiced in front of a mirror, shoulders back, chin high, the posture of someone used to delivering bad news with a polite smile. Jack didn't stand. He waited. She let herself in through the side gate, which was already an offense in his book. "Oh, Mr. Whitlow," she said brightly, approaching with the practiced warmth of a local news anchor. "I hope you received the letter. We've had some concerns." "I read it," Jack said. His voice was flat, not unfriendly, not warm. Karen made a sympathetic face, then looked around like she was appraising a fixer-upper. "It's such a beautiful space you've got here, so much open air, so much potential." Jack didn't answer. She pressed on. "We've been discussing some exciting recreational opportunities for the community. Areas like yours, just outside our jurisdiction, yes, but visually central, can serve as beautiful green spaces, shared places." Jack narrowed his eyes. "You mean my pasture?" "Well, it's not just about you," Karen said, shifting her smile. "It's about all of us, Mr. Whitlow." He glanced past her toward the fence line. Something caught his eye. A small wooden stake, new, sharp, driven into the dirt about 10 feet inside his property line, and another, farther down. Karen followed his gaze. "Surveyors get a bit eager," she said with a light laugh. "You know how they are." Jack rose slowly from his chair, not fast enough to be threatening, but firm enough to end the conversation. Karen didn't budge. "If you don't act," she said, her tone suddenly cooler, "the community might have to." Then she gave a short, satisfied wave and walked off like the verdict had been handed down. Jack stood there long after her car disappeared down the road. By sunset, the shadows had stretched long across the field. He walked the southern edge of his property in silence, boots crunching dry soil, eyes tracking the stakes that didn't belong. The land felt different tonight, not unsafe, but unsettled. Back at the barn, the air inside was cooler. Dust hung in sunbeams slanting through wooden slats. Tools sat untouched on pegs, silent observers of a man who hadn't needed them in years. Jack opened the old trunk beneath the workbench. Inside, a worn leather glove. The scent of oil and feathers still clung to it. Beneath that, the curved perch. The hood, dark and smooth, shaped for a creature that once ruled his skies. He reached in slowly, brushing off the dust with careful fingers. The leather was still good. Blaze's perch, the glove, the leather hood, each piece waiting exactly where he had left them. Blaze launched into the sky, wings wide like a memory awakened. The morning was cool, a rare softness in the heat of late July. Mist clung to the pasture in thin silver ribbons, and the sky blushed faintly orange as dawn broke over Sunrise Bluffs. Jack stood near the barn, arm extended, leather gloves snug around his hand. Blaze rose from the perch with no hesitation, talons curling open before the wind caught her. She soared upward, cutting the sky with a grace that hadn't faded with time. Jack watched her go, a faint smile twitching the edge of his mouth. It had been years, but the muscle memory was still there, for both of them. He remembered that first flight years ago, when he'd found her after the summer storm. She'd been young then, feathers ruffled, one wing bent at a worrying angle. But she'd healed, and on that day, when he first released her, she'd circled back, broken but determined. Now, with every beat of her wings, Jack felt the same quiet defiance rekindle in his chest. Inside the barn, the space had changed. The old workbench had been cleared. Hay bales stacked to create a training ring. Targets had been set in the corners, marked with red flags for aerial drills. Rick had stopped by earlier that morning, dropping off a box of gear from Jack's falconry days, tracking tags, weighted lures, even a dusty field journal. "I thought you might need the old tools," Rick said, setting the box down. "She's not the only one who needs a tune-up." They spent the next hour adjusting Blaze's tracking band, fitting it gently around her leg. Rick calibrated the receiver, occasionally muttering about battery life and signal strength. Blaze tolerated them both with a regal stillness, eyes sharp, head tilting in slow, studied movements. By the third day, Blaze was circling wide and smooth. She responded to glove calls, retrieved flagged lures, and hovered long enough to test her timing against the wind. Jack relearned how to read her flight paths, the subtle dips, the banking turns, the brief pauses that signaled a decision. That same day, just past noon, Jack heard the buzz. It came from the western ridge this time, a pair of drones gliding in low. Their movements were more deliberate now, synchronized, equipped with small green lights blinking under their rotors. One broke left, the other right, weaving a slow arc across Jack's land. He didn't call Blaze down. Instead, he stepped back, eyes fixed on the sky, and waited. Blaze had already seen them. She rose higher, then dropped like a stone, wings tucked. The right-hand drone tried to bank out of the way, but it was too slow. Blaze struck clean, one swipe with her talons across the propellers, and the drone spun wildly before crashing into a haystack with a dull crunch. The second drone bolted upward, but Blaze pivoted midair, chasing it with predator precision. Jack gave a short whistle, and she veered off, circling back to the glove with measured ease. Rick arrived minutes later, engine still warm, boots dusty. "Heard the buzz from the diner," he said. "That yours?" Jack gestured toward the wreckage near the hay. "Yours now." They hauled into the barn and pried it open. Inside, a surprisingly intact SD card blinked red. That night, Jack plugged the card into an old laptop he kept for ranch logs. The footage loaded slowly. First, shaky flyovers of his property, close-ups of the barn, the workshop, even the old porch swing where his niece used to play. Then came something unexpected. A group gathered under a white tent. Karen stood at the center, her hair perfectly curled, makeup immaculate. She held a mic in one hand and a stack of notes in the other. She began speaking. "We believe in shared growth, in transforming unused space into collective beauty." Then she stopped. A man off camera said something. Karen sighed, then laughed awkwardly. "Wait, start over. I can cry this time." The video paused, then replayed. Karen's voice cracked, eyes glistening. "This isn't about me. It's about what's best for all of us." The footage ended with the HOA logo and a slide titled Community Expansion, August 12th Proposal. Jack stared at the screen, unmoving. Outside, the crickets had begun their nightly song. A soft breeze stirred the edges of the curtain. He shut the laptop and stepped outside, Blaze already perched quietly on the fence. Jack leaned against the wood, arms resting on the top rail, eyes toward the horizon. "You brought tech," he says softly. "I brought legacy." The banner at the HOA event read, "A new vision for Sunrise Bluffs," but Jack knew exactly whose land was buried under that vision. The letters were bold and cheerful, flapping just slightly in the warm breeze above a row of folding chairs. Beneath them, neatly arranged tables overflowed with pamphlets, iced lemonade, and tiny American flags poked into flower pots. Jack stood just beyond the fence line, arms folded across his chest, hat low against the light. He didn't need a brochure to know what this was about. Blaze had flown higher than ever at sunrise. She'd cut across the sky like a ribbon of shadow, slicing through the early clouds with purpose. Jack had watched her from the back porch, the wind tugging at his sleeves, and he knew. Today was the day. The Community Renewal Festival, as it was officially called, had drawn a decent crowd. There were kids running between booths, couples sipping from styrofoam cups, and neighbors exchanging polite hellos over barbecue smoke. It looked like a celebration, but Jack saw it for what it was: stagecraft, a backdrop for what Karen planned to announce. She took the stage at precisely 4 o'clock, wearing a crisp blazer in community blue and a wide smile that could have sold refrigerators to Alaskans. A modest microphone crackled as she cleared her throat. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice light and smooth. "We gather today not just to enjoy each other's company, but to imagine a future where we all share in the beauty and purpose of this place." Jack shifted his weight slightly. Rick stood beside him at the edge of the clearing, eyes on the small screen of a signal monitor tucked under his arm. Karen continued. "For too long, some parcels of land have gone unused, uninviting, separating us instead of uniting us. But with your support, we can transform these forgotten spaces into gardens, gathering spots, and shared sanctuaries. Together, we can make Sunrise Bluffs a model for harmony." Jack's jaw tightened. He could hear the applause start up, polite and sparse, as if the crowd wasn't entirely sure when to clap. Karen waited, smiled, then turned slightly to gesture toward a large printed map propped beside her on an easel. His pasture was outlined in pale green. Rick leaned over and muttered, "She's got the gall to put it right there in full view." Jack didn't reply. He reached down, tugged gently on the fine tether in his hand. Blaze took off from a nearby tree, soaring high and smooth above the gathering. Her wings cast a narrow shadow over the crowd, too quick to be noticed at first. But as she circled once, then twice, eyes began to lift. A few pointed. A child gasped. Someone near the grill said, "Is that a hawk?" Then she dived. The lead drone had been hovering quietly behind the stage, half camouflaged against the blue sky. It blinked lazily as Blaze struck it clean from the side. The drone spun once, twice, then crashed behind the lemonade tent with a wet thunk. Gasps rose. Phones shot into the air. Karen paused, her smile faltering. "Let's remain calm. Probably just a bird." Rick was already moving. He retrieved the drone from where it had landed, wires sparking slightly, camera blinking but intact. In one smooth motion, he plugged it into a portable screen he'd stashed beside the cooler. The image blinked to life. On screen, a group of HOA members in lawn chairs gathered around a folding table marked with survey maps. Karen stood at the center, tapping her pen against a parcel labeled with Jack's name. "We'll pitch it as community green space," she said. "A poll, some photo ops, maybe a children's mural. Once we get public support, it's just paperwork." The voice was unmistakable, her tone breezy, confident. The footage paused mid-sentence. Silence rippled across the lawn. Then came the first gasp, and another. Murmurs buzzed through the crowd, fast and multiplying. Several people pointed at the screen. Others turned to Karen. A woman in a sun hat whispered, "That's her, right?" Karen tried to speak, but the microphone let out a shrill whine. She stepped back, hand raised, but no words came. From the edge of the lawn, the sheriff moved forward. Sheriff McClellan, still in his khaki button-up, casually set his lemonade on a nearby speaker and straightened his shoulders. His gaze was calm, but direct. No one else moved, not even the kids. Karen stood frozen, eyes darting between the faces in the crowd, her hand still hovering near the mic. Her mouth opened, then closed. Phones come out. Gasps ripple. Karen freezes, mid-sentence, and the sheriff starts walking toward her. Karen's voice cracked, but the crowd didn't blink. Too many had already seen the truth. The footage had burned through Sunrise Bluffs like dry grass in July. By the time the sun dipped low that evening, every porch light in the neighborhood glowed over murmured conversations. Screens glowed inside kitchens. Voices lowered to whispers. The HOA's Golden Girl had been caught mid-performance, and the curtain wasn't coming down quietly. Jack sat on his porch, a mug of black coffee resting on the arm of his chair, though it had long gone cold. Across the gravel drive, Rick leaned against the hood of his truck with a smug sort of satisfaction in his posture. "She rehearsed for this," Rick said, keeping his voice just above the chirping crickets. "But not for losing." Jack didn't respond. He just kept his eyes on the fading light, listening to the breeze carry snippets of neighborly concern, folks standing by mailboxes a little longer than usual, a few crossing yards they hadn't crossed in years. The video Karen posted barely an hour after the event was meant to repair the damage. Filmed from her patio with soft lighting and carefully mussed hair, she blinked through glassy eyes and clutched a tissue with both hands. "I only ever wanted what's best for our community," she sniffed. "I never imagined my actions would be misunderstood this way." She paused perfectly, allowing just enough silence for emotion to build. Her voice wavered. She smiled bravely. But it was too late. The town had seen something real. Her own voice, caught on her own drone, outlining a plan to manipulate public support and take something that wasn't hers. No amount of shaky video editing could compete with that. Rick had the unedited footage before she finished her second sentence. He found it tucked inside the drone's memory, buried between file names like Promo A Take 2 and Karen's Speech Final. This one was raw, no filters. Just her pacing back and forth under a party tent, practicing her lines with the camera running. "Too stiff," she said. "Try again, this time with more tremble in my voice." She dabbed at imaginary tears. "People are suckers for sincerity. I need to look devastated, not defensive." Rick played the clip 3 times before he walked it over to Jack, shaking his head like he couldn't quite believe his luck. "Do you want the honors?" he asked. "Or should I?" Jack simply handed the flash drive to the sheriff the next morning. Sheriff McClellan didn't say much, just a low whistle when the video ended and a slow scratch at the back of his head. "That drone's not registered," he said. And she's standing in a field she doesn't own, holding a survey map. That's 2 violations before she even opens her mouth. By afternoon, the HOA board had begun to splinter. 2 members removed their names from the expansion petition. Another issued a vague statement about misalignment of process. The board called an emergency session, and Karen, for the first time in her reign, was asked not to attend. Officially, she was suspended pending review. Unofficially, the tide had turned. Twilight brought long shadows across Jack's porch. He was finishing a fence post inventory when he heard the crunch of tires. The same blue sedan rolled up. No music this time, no waving. Karen stepped out without her clipboard. She looked tired, eyes slightly sunken, blouse wrinkled like she'd lost the energy to iron it. Jack didn't move to greet her. She walked halfway up the drive, stopped a good distance from the porch, and spoke. "If I resign, if I make it all go away, will you drop everything? No press? No meetings? No drama?" Jack set the post he was holding against the railing and leaned his weight on one leg. He took his time before responding. "This wasn't about press," he said. "Or winning." She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to plead, but nothing came out. Her shoulders sagged. "I was just trying to—" She started, then stopped. Jack didn't fill the silence. He didn't offer comfort. He just stood there, calm and steady, letting her face the stillness. Karen turned without another word. The gravel crunched under her shoes as she walked back to her car. She didn't slam the door, didn't look back. As she pulled away, Jack watched the taillights shrink into the dark. She's no longer angry. She's afraid. Blaze glided over the pasture at sunrise, casting a shadow no drone would dare follow. The air was cool and still, the kind of stillness that only comes after a storm has passed, quiet not from fear, but from peace settling in. Her wings stretched wide, catching the soft gold of the morning light as she coasted over the barn, the fence line, the hills that marked the edge of Jack's world. There was no buzz beneath her, no blinking lights in the sky. Just open air and her shadow slipping over the land like a blessing. Jack leaned against the gate, arms resting on the top rail, eyes following her every movement. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. He was just watching. He thought back to the sheriff's visit earlier that week. After handing Jack the official close-out papers, McClellan had lingered a bit, sipping from a thermos and gazing out over the pasture. "You didn't just protect your land," he'd said. "You woke this whole town up." Jack hadn't replied then. He just nodded, quietly absorbing the weight of it. But he thought about it now, as Blaze dipped toward the barn roof and caught a rising gust to lift her higher again. Later that morning, a car pulled up the driveway. Not the HOA blue sedan that used to haunt his thoughts, but a silver pickup, clean, modest. A young man in his 30s stepped out with a pie in one hand and a folded envelope in the other. "Mr. Whitlow?" he asked, polite but not timid. Jack stepped off the porch. "That's me. I'm Mike Harper, new HOA president. I just wanted to stop by and, well, start on the right foot." He handed over the pie, peach and cinnamon, still warm. Jack accepted it with a small nod. "There's also a letter in here," Mike added, tapping the envelope. "Apology from the board. You'll probably notice most of the names aren't the same anymore." Jack glanced down at it. "I won't read it right away." Mike smiled. "I wouldn't either." They stood for a moment, the silence between them not awkward, just quiet. "Oh, and there's a community invite going around. Town potluck this evening. You're more than welcome. No speeches required." Jack looked up. "Wouldn't have one ready anyway." By sunset, the field behind the community center had filled with laughter, folding chairs, and long tables crowded with casseroles and iced tea. Rick waved Jack over with a plate already stacked high. "They asked you to speak?" he said, mouth full. "High school, Jack replied. "Falconry and land stewardship." Rick grinned. "And just like that, you're Sunrise Bluffs' most interesting man." Blaze appeared just as the kids were finishing their second round of hot dogs. She circled above, a dark arc against the coral-pink sky, graceful and commanding. The children pointed, faces lit with awe. A few older folks clapped, some just nodded, quietly recognizing what she meant now. Jack watched from his seat near the edge of the crowd, root beer in hand. It had been a long time since he felt this settled. The land, the sky, the people, it all felt different. Or maybe it had always been this way, and he was finally seeing it again. Rick nudged him with an elbow. "Thinking of putting her on the mailbox?" Jack chuckled. "Maybe I'll name the next one Freedom." They sat there a while longer, watching as the last sliver of sun dipped behind the hills. Rick leaned in, voice low. "Heard Karen signed with some HOA documentary crew." Jack didn't blink, just tipped his hat back and replied, "Let 'em film the sky. They'll never own it." At sunrise, the land stretched quiet and whole again, as if it had taken a breath no one noticed was being held. Jack had stood his ground, not for glory, not for revenge, but to remind a town of what mattered. Sometimes justice doesn't come with loud victories, but with neighbors waking up, remembering who they are and who they stand beside. A ranch isn't just soil and fence posts. It's a legacy built on truth, trust, and the will to guard what's right. And when the sky is finally clear, that's when you realize peace isn't silent, it's earned.